big motivator, Hollie. Hollie is a wonderful friend and social worker and educator, but she also facilitates support groups. And of course, all of those other things I just said about her makes her an outstanding facilitator in a support group. And we had been on our journey for a pretty long time when we went to the West Center. Steve was at another memory care center before that, and of course, was at home, for many years prior to that. But I would be really open and honest about our struggles and our journey in support groups. And sometimes Hollie would kind of take me aside when the group was finished and tell me that our stories were really helping people. And I began to think, well, if what we have been through and are still going through can help 6 people around a table, maybe if I put the word out there in a different way, it could help more people. So that's kind of what, and with a journalism degree, somehow in my brain, I thought I would always write a book. Of course, my 25-year-old self never would have imagined that this would be the book that I would write. But I began toying with titles and ideas and writing things down, and then the pandemic hit, and I really had nothing but time. We were all at home, and the Holy Spirit just really put this call on my heart. And I told someone recently, I said, as bad as the shutdown was, and I didn't get to visit Steve for 7 months, it was awful. But I said, in a way, as I was writing the book, it was kind of a holy time, a sacred time for me. So that's sort of really how it all happened.
And that's perfect. It moves right into my next question was writing the book cathartic for you? I mean, what happened with you during that time?
And that's a question I have been asked before, and I looked up the word catharsis, and it really means sort of a relieving of emotions, tough emotions. And I don't know that I was really relieved of them as I was reliving them. But in hindsight, I think being able to see our journey, which continues. My husband is still in the final stages of Alzheimer's at the West Center. But I think being able to view it in the context of love and faith and hope was very healing. And, like so many difficult things as you're going through it, you're putting one foot in front of the other and just trying to survive it. And so being able to reflect on it and see the Lord's hand and the love of Hollie and others who worked with Steve and our friends and our family was really a wonderful thing.
You mentioned that there, of course, as you were writing, that you were reliving a lot of this also. Did you hold back anything? Did you consider holding back as you were writing?
Well, I know from the very beginning, Hollie and I talked about this, and she said, Kathe, if you're going to do this, you got to do it raw. You have to be really, really truthful. So other than just a few things out of respect for Steve's dignity, to maintain his dignity, because if you know anything about dementia, you know that the altering of the expressions and behaviors is often not pretty. So other than just a little bit of that, I didn't hold back at all. And I had the full support of our kids who really were excited to tell the story. They shared with me their pain and their struggle, which they were not as open and honest about, again, as we were putting one foot in front of the other. So it was interesting in a way to go back and interview the kids who are young adults, by that point, to hear how it was all affecting them at the time.
And I think that has been so much of the feedback that I've heard as well. And I know you have also, that you ask the kids, your adult children,
Yes.
if they were going to be okay with this about you really being, and we used the word raw, and telling the good, the bad, and the ugly about this. And I think that's how families and professionals have related, because you tell the truth
Thank you.
and you talk about, and your children were honest with you about their feelings, and you put it in the book. You didn't sugarcoat, you just were honest with it. Now, one thing, others have described the prologue as Alzheimer's being a form of a thief. Would you share more about that?
Well, that is, and that's not, that didn't originate with me, but as I was thinking about a prologue and how to begin the book, really, I was sitting in, I have kind of an open concept kitchen family room area when my bedroom's on one side, and I just thought about someone coming in and taking little things one by one. And, you know, in the beginning, I talk about things in the back of drawer, you know, the junk drawer or the back of a closet that you don't see. And the home is, it's like the brain. As things begin to go, and people with dementia, you know, you don't really notice it, and your loved ones don't notice it at first. But as the dementia thief becomes bolder and bolder, you know, you begin to lose your ability to use the telephone, to remember how the remote on the television works, to cook, you know, to follow a recipe, or to even safely be able to turn on the stove, and just, and the clothing. And, you know, for a while, when Steve was at one memory care center, and really he was young and he was so healthy in every part of his body but his brain. So he could walk, he could do his, for a long time, his activities of daily living. But he would layer, and Hollie remembers this, you know, he would layer clothes, and just sort of losing the ability to think this was a man who got up, and back when lawyers wore suits and ties, and sometimes three-piece suits every day, you know, that was his manner. I mean, that was just his routine. And just to see all that kind of fall away. But that's part of the thief thing, is that it steals and steals until there's so little left, you know, but a soul and a heart that loves.
Ladies, we have a question about asking what's important for those folks that are working in memory care units about understanding or approaching families of the residents. Like, what things do you think are the most important in those interactions?
I think, and Hollie can talk to this probably even better than I can, because she's been in this industry for so long. But personally, I think compassion, understanding, kindness. I think, other than just with the family, with the residents, because I have observed staff who do it so well and some staff who do not. Patience, I think, is very key, even with residents and with family. You know, families are struggling too. And just in how you approach, rather than telling people it's this way or that way, what Hollie always says is, you know, go to their world, and helping families, I think, understand to go to the world that the dementia patient, their loved one who has dementia, is in, and not to try to keep telling them, no, it's this way or it's that way, or, you know, and it's okay to say, I'll see you soon, because soon can mean anything. Soon can mean next week or tonight or tomorrow. You know, it's, anyway, Hollie, I'll let you chime in.
I think it's important to understand, especially after placement, that whenever somebody is placed, and one of the things our medical director has said for 30 years is that we don't have one patient, we've got two, at least two, because that we've now we need to take care of that entire family. And I am blessed to be at a place where my job is to take care of these families by offering support groups, by teaching things like compassion, like Kathe just said, but also validation, to validate to the families that what they are feeling, it is their feelings, it is okay, and there are other people having those feelings. What comes up so often in my support groups, and we talk about that it is a safe place to say the things you need to say, that you sometimes as a spouse can't say to your adult children, or as an adult child, you can't say to your other parent, the parent that is the caregiver. Hard things like, when is this going to be over? Is it okay that I pray that this be over? And all I do is I help them reframe that you're not praying that your loved one die. That's not what you're asking for. You're praying that this disease be over. So let's reframe the thought and stop beating ourselves up so much and have some grace. And the other thing I think is important after placement is to help those families understand they didn't know what they didn't know. Because boy, can families land in the if onlys, woulda, coulda, shoulda. And that is a ticket to depression is what that is.
And as Hollie knows, I had a lot of that. Plus, and Hollie, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it just made me think initially on placement, everybody feels guilt. Families feel guilt. And I remember expressing that to Hollie, and she said, well, I'd worry about you if you didn't. You feel guilty because you love Steve, and you want the best for him. But then and that it's normal. And that's like she was saying, to let families know that what they're feeling isn't just their feeling. Like another reason I wrote the book, to let other people know that these journeys are shared journeys, although everybody's is a little different. There's a lot we all have in common. So I just think, to let people know, yes, that it's okay to feel what you're feeling, just like you said.
And Kathe, with us talking about placement, I'd be interested, just as a reminder for those that have read the book and for those that maybe haven't finished it, would you just briefly tell the story of your play? What was it? What happened that you knew it was time for placement? That's a question that I know we all get a lot. What was it?
Well, and my story is similar to some and very different than others. And I think as a general rule, Hollie, what do we say? If your ability to care for your loved one, it's just you're overwhelmed. You cannot care for yourself and care for your loved one anymore, either physically, emotionally, mentally. Then that's a sign. Also, if your safety or your loved one's safety you feel like is being threatened, and your loved one's safety could be threatened simply by the fact that they find the car keys and you haven't been able to figure out a way to get the car away from them, or they're wandering and you can't find them and the police has had to come more than once. In our case, it was a safety issue in that Steve's challenging expressions were increasing. We had an extremely tough weekend, and each day we had these expressions for quite a while in the disease, but they would be spread out. The instances would be, but then they got closer and closer together. And we had one really difficult weekend in which I just did not feel that Steve or I were safe in our home anymore. And I had to call 911. Didn't have a plan. By the time they got there, Steve was fine. Didn't remember anything had happened. And I thought for a moment about, okay, do I just say never mind? But then I reflected on everything that had been happening over the weekend. And I thought, and we'll be in our home, and 30 minutes from now, this is going to start all over again. So the thing that I did that was the woulda, coulda, shoulda, I didn't have a plan. And they took Steve to, the county hospital and then sent him to a behavioral health hospital, which is not a good place for someone with dementia. But during that time that he was there, then we found the memory care center that he first went to, that was in that time the ideal place for him. But and I will say that people, and I know you all are in this industry, and don't take it personally if somebody feels like they need to move at some point. The disease changes, and people change, and needs change, and sometimes just location can be a deciding, one of the deciding factors. So as it turned out, Steve had an incident and ended up in the hospital again, and I just felt at that point it was time to move him to the West Center, and that was about 4.5 years ago. So
I think that's a great point to make, is that being professionals in the field, is that I think it's important for us to always remember that we may not always be the best fit for the entire journey of the disease, regardless of if we are an age in place or whatever we may call ourselves, that there are times that it's just no longer the appropriate fit. So that's a good point also. I like that you mentioned the crisis, because so many people, and we know, they place after a crisis. But one of the things Kathe talks so much about is not having the plan. And so I know we've discussed, and we talk an awful lot in our support groups about go and visit places ahead of time, just in case you do have to place. Encourage families to go ahead and make decisions while they're not in crisis, to go out and visit a lot of places and have a place in mind. Another thing I wanted to mention before we move on to the next question is that now in bigger cities, you can ask specifically for a mental health officer. If you do have to call 911, a lot of the bigger cities now do have mental health officers that are trained a little more in memory care, so that they don't get treated quite the way that we have seen them be treated in the past. So thank you for bringing that up, Kathe. I did want to ask you, your book is being used as curriculum at some schools, including Texas Christian University, TCU, and it's part of an undergraduate course. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, I was so honored to be asked if it could be a part of the families, caregivers, and people living with dementia class in the Harris College of Nursing and Health Sciences at TCU. So it's part of their required reading, and the book came out just a year ago. So the class is offered every semester. So I have been out there twice to discuss it and have Q&A with the students, and they're mostly nursing students, but there was a journalism major, which that was interesting to me, social workers, people all across the board, some of whom want to go into this field, many of whom have a family member, and it's usually a grandparent or maybe a great aunt or uncle who are experiencing some type of dementia. But our son went with me last spring, and that was wonderful because those students are the age that he was when his dad was diagnosed. So they had an awful lot of questions for him. And he was needing some counseling at that point of his dad's diagnosis, or after. He needed it sooner than we got it. But, I didn't really realize, again, what all he was going through. But the counselor told me, she said, for young people, students, she said, this is about the next thing to having a parent die while you're in. And she said, kids usually lose at least a semester, if not a year, just dealing with this grief. And as Hollie has taught me, the ambiguous grief. It's grieving the loss of someone who's still very much alive, but you're losing them a little at a time and piece by piece. So, you know, our son was experiencing a lot of grief, not only over his dad, but the loss of some other things. And anyway, so it was really good for him to be able to be there and share. And typically he said things in that group that he never told me. And I'm like, really? That's interesting. So
That's good.
yes, it's been quite an honor, and I'm going out again in October to visit with the students.
Excellent. I think it's interesting you did bring up the ambiguous grief, and that goes right with the question that was asked about what we can do. I think helping families identify that what they are feeling is grief, because we tend to relate grief with death, when in reality, grief is loss. It's just loss. And of course, with this disease, with all of the dementias, these families are going through loss every single day. They're grieving the loss of someone who's still very much alive, like Kathe said. But to be able to, your son, to go out with you, that had to be also very healing for him. I would think that really helped him. Well, let me ask you, what do you want others to know who might be dealing with this illness? If we've got some people on the call today who maybe are not only professionals who work in the field, but also do this personally.
Okay, I think we've touched on a lot of that, is patience, understanding, compassion. It's very difficult not to say, don't you remember? And I just told you, and all of those things. You know, if they say the moon's made of cream cheese, just, oh yeah, isn't that interesting? And look, it's a crescent moon. Somebody took a big bite out of it tonight. You know, just because to let go of things that don't matter. I think that's a really big one. And that's been hard, but just to learn. So, you know, so what if Steve has on 2 vests and 3 shirts, and you know what and unless it's affecting him because of the temperature or something, it really doesn't matter. Yes, grooming and health and all of that, helping people do that, to brush their teeth and bathe, personal hygiene, that matters, but a whole lot of it doesn't. But you know what? If you don't have a bath every single day, that's okay too. So I think that that's just a big part of it. And just to, I think sometimes too, here's 2 things that have helped me. If this were me, how would I want Steve to take care of me and respond to me? And then on the flip side, I have to think, this tears me up, but I have to think about, this isn't just about me caring for him. Let me step back and reflect on all the things he's lost too. It's not just about our kids now have their own kids. So we have 4 grandchildren, and it's not just about them not having their dad to interact with their grandchildren, but Steve's missed out on that, you know, and that just helps me have more compassion for him and the disease, I think. And he didn't do anything to bring this on, you know, it's just one of those tragic, sad things. And he led a very healthy lifestyle and did nothing to cause this. And even if he had, you know, so what? It is what it is, and we just have to deal with it as best we can and as lovingly as we can.
And what you're describing is empathy. I mean, you're describing empathy, to be able to stand in his shoes for a minute. I think that's important also, to teach families and help families understand that, look at everything he's lost. You know, we can get caught up in our losses, but that he has missed the pleasure of. That's a great point. What is something, or what's been the most rewarding thing that has happened since your book was published?
Well, things like this are exciting. Really the feedback when people have told me that it's helped them and they've paid it forward to somebody else, that means more than anything, as people have told me that it's helped them on their journey. And an unexpected reward has been people that my husband used to work with who have come up to me, which never would have happened. You know, maybe if he had died, they would have, but without the book, kind of putting it out there, they've sought me out as former colleagues, even a judge, to tell me how much he meant to them. And, you know, very often we don't know a lot about, if our spouse doesn't talk about their work, and of course, it's an attorney, had attorney-client privilege, so he really didn't talk a lot about his work. So now people have come to me and told me wonderful things that he did to help them. And then other attorneys and the judge, just how much respect they had for him and what a wonderful man, as well as an attorney he was. So that's been an unexpected benefit.
So tell us about Steve now. How is Steve now? You mentioned earlier that he is here at the West Center, but kind of tell us, where is he in the disease right now?
Well, he is in the final stages. If there's 3 stages, he's in the 3rd stage. If there's 7, he's in the 7th. If there's 10, he's in the 10th. And all that depends on which chart you're looking at. He can no longer do anything for himself, including feeding himself. So I typically go at mealtime, usually lunch, to feed him and be with him because he sleeps a whole lot. And I was missing the other day the times when I could just show up at 2 or 3 in the afternoon and, you know, be with him, and he would pace the halls and they'd put on music and we'd dance. This man who never liked to dance would only do it when I drug him to the dance floor, began to find a dance floor in every corner whenever there was music on. So that was a happy thing that happened from the disease. But of course now he's in a jerry chair and he can't do any of that. And he doesn't really show a lot of recognition of our children. All the grandchildren have been up because I thought it might be important to them someday to have a picture with Stevie, their other grandfather. But he still shows recognition of me. And I pray that he does until his last day, because if that goes away, that's going to be another big moment of grief. But he doesn't say words except for yeah, yes, no, sometimes okay. But with his eyes, and he'll go, oh, when I'm there, which is with a smile. So that's wonderful.
Well, that leads right in. I was going to ask you about your connection and your relationship with Steve throughout the course of the disease. How have you maintained the connection or the relationship as husband-wife versus maybe lots of times I will hear caregivers say, I am a caregiver. That is my identity, is caregiver. How have you kept the connection even now at this point in the disease, that connection of husband-wife?
I do remember the words that I heard in support group where someone said, I realized when I placed my wife, I was being the best caregiver I could be. I wasn't giving up my caregiving responsibilities, but I was being, because the time had come where he needed a caregiving team, not just himself. And I felt that way as well. Hollie, what was your question again?
Asking about the connection, how you've
The
kept
connection. Well, yeah, I mean,
husband and wife.
yes, husband and wife. And so of course you can continue to do that. Golly, it's in some ways easier now. I think when he was first placed, he was so physically able, but he had a lot of anger, and outbursts. And Hollie would always say, and this is something to pass along to families too, big hellos, little goodbyes, because he was always glad to see me and the children. But, he was not happy when we left. And so we just didn't make a big deal out of the goodbyes. We just kind of, we had a dog. It was Steve's dog that I used to take to visit him. And I would say, well, I've got to go feed the dog. I'll be back soon. Just something quick, some little excuse. But, I don't know that I ever felt like I relinquished my role as wife to be caregiver. I think this is going to sound terrible. I think I resented my role as wife for a while when things were really, really difficult at home and when it was so difficult to visit him. But now I feel so privileged to be his wife. I've understood what a huge responsibility all of this has been and continues to be. And, but even without dementia, you think about those of you who are married, your role. I heard someone on the Today Show talking about love and just the different phases and, the infatuation and then the kind of trying to work things out and then the acceptance and all that. Sounds like the stages of grief, but I guess a little of that is kind of stages of love and marriage too. So anyway, I love him very much and I'm privileged to be his wife.
And one of the beautiful things that Kathe does, and even this past Friday at our support group, I was talking to another wife about she will put her head on Steve's forehead. She'll go forehead to forehead because his world has become very, very small. It has really come in and she's just gone right there with him. And it's just beautiful to see them like that. I did have one thing I wanted to ask you about that I just thought of, Kathe, that I know you can address. What was it like? How did you give yourself permission after placement to do things like travel, to have a life essentially, and do things that Steve wasn't going to be involved in? And I know this comes up a lot with travel. That's what made me think of it, was travel. How did you go about
initially that? And I have a sister who passed away. That's in the book. But at the point where Steve was placed, she said, you have to promise me you're going to have a life and you're not going to visit him. Now, some people visit every day, and I think that's awesome. But she felt like that wasn't good for me at that point. And indeed, our daughter was getting married, and then our son got married a few months after that. So she was probably right. It wasn't good. And it was emotional. It took, as my son said, took a little piece out of me each time to visit him initially. So I think she sort of gave me permission initially, and she's my older sister, and I would do anything she said. But I know, and I have known at both places, as I know all of you work at wonderful, caring places too, that he was having good care and it was going to be okay. And I tell you, the other thing is pretty early on, Steve lost his sense of time, and time just ceased to have meaning really to him. So I knew he wasn't going to realize if I wasn't there for a week. If I came back, it could have been like I'd been there the day before. So that's an awful thing to lose, but it's kind of a blessing for the caregivers too, for the loved ones, because it kind of releases you from they may still say, why haven't you been here? But they don't know the time you haven't been here. They might say that when you came back 5 minutes later, where have you been? So I think that just, and really because although our children were young adults at the time, they were still young, in their 20s, and our son had just turned 21. I think for me, I didn't want the kids to lose both their parents. They were going to lose Steve. And I just thought, boy, if they lose me too, or if they lose me first, if I didn't take care of myself, then they were going to have to take care of Steve. And I didn't want them to have that burden at that young age, so yeah.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And I wanted to ask you one more thing before we kind of start to wrap up, and then ask if there are questions. As I was sitting here looking at your book, and I remember when you sent me the ideas for the cover of the book.
Yes.
Could you explain the cover of the book?
I'd be happy to, and I wish I had a rose with me, but it is, when you think of a rose being beautiful and whole, and then the petals begin, as it begins to die, kind of the outside petals die, and they turn brown on the edges and yellow, and they begin to fall off. And I've thought of that as being, memory, language skills, cognition, motor skills, just the ability to use the telephone. I mean, all the different things that fall away, kind of like the thief, but encapsulated in that rose petal, until the one beautiful petal that's left is the soul that remains, the soul that loves. So that was the inspiration for the book cover.
Very, very nice. Any ideas or thoughts about another book? Let me just throw that out there.
Oh, golly. Well, I've talked to you about that. I have had one, but it would not be a memoir. Obviously, I've told that story. I've thought about maybe interviewing other people about the emotional journey. It's a very lonely journey. Even if you have loving family members around you, great friends, as I have been so blessed to have, it is still lonely. And I've thought about, especially spouses, talking to them and, maybe interviewing just how they've dealt with the emotional journey of this. But it's just up here right now.
Well, Kathe, and I know Diana, everybody agrees, I appreciate how vulnerable you allow yourself to be as you tell your family's story and your family's journey. And I'm so glad to be part of this with you. And we will open up for questions if anybody has anything. Diana, have you seen anything else?
Not anything else, but I wanted to say, Kathe, I've been involved with senior living since 2015 when I came to work with TALA, so fairly new, but I've learned a lot in a short amount of time, especially through COVID, obviously. I've sat in a lot of classes, I've attended lectures. Your book brought this home in a way that it had never been before. Because
thank you.
I had a great grandmother that had dementia. She was 95.
Wow.
But yeah. But I think one of the things that really brought it home to me was because conceptually I understand the process and what happens in the, you see movies and the losing of certain things. When you talked about the remote control and then the phone, those things to me really brought the level of frustration and how difficult, and that really brought this horrible process home to me. And thank you for making me understand.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
It's been amazing how many families have come forward and said to me, how did Kathe Goodwin write my story? And of course, the story isn't the same, but the feelings and the emotions, I hear it all the time. she wrote my story. She told, and as we were talking about it, as Kathe was working on this book, I think that was one of the goals, was to be able to meet people right where they were and validate those feelings. Kathe just has the gift to be able to put it in writing and to make it so. And everybody who's read also saw that at the beginning of every chapter, she has a Bible verse. Kathe, could you speak to that just a minute? How did you choose? Did you just pray over and ask the Holy Spirit to come, or how did you choose the Bible verse to go with each verse? I mean, with each chapter?
Well, actually, I love Jesus Calling and the sequel to it. And anyway, so I would read that every day, the devotional book. And when at the end of each devotional, there are usually 3 scriptures that the devotional is based on. So I would look up those scriptures, and I really began thinking that I was going to do the book kind of courage and strength and guidance, kind of divide it into that. And then I realized that I couldn't just, that there were so much where I needed guidance, comfort, and strength. And when I needed all of them at the same time. So I couldn't really divide it up like that. But I began writing down scriptures that related to those things, to guidance, to comfort, and to strength. And I kept them just in a folder. And then as the book kind of developed the way that it did, I started just writing down other scriptures that spoke to me. So anyway, I had them all in the folder. And then when I kind of had the book done, I went back and I thought, what scripture relates? And I looked at a couple of the different translations of the Bible to see which ones would fit best. But anyway, I thought, what scripture really fits this chapter? And then sometimes I had to tweak the chapter a little bit to go with the scripture. But that's really kind of how that. But yes, I prayed over it too, of course. But they didn't just magically fall in my lap or on the page.
Anybody else have any questions? If you want to put your video on, I stopped everybody's video so we could focus on Kathe and Hollie earlier. And everybody's on mute. Anybody have anything? Well, thank you both so much. I was a little late to record this. Thank you so much, Helen, for reminding me to start the recording. I should have said it automatically. But I did record the bulk of this, and I'll send it to everybody that registered. So if you want to watch part of it again, or if you want to send it to somebody, please feel free to do that. We will probably have another TALABook event. I'm going to ask Hollie for suggestions in a couple of months. We also have coming up actually next week, and I will share it on my screen so people can see this. Next week we have culinary hints for dining, for memory care dining. If you go to the TALA website, on the home page, you're able to sign up for everything. We always put our events that are coming up. This should be interesting. We're going to have an actual demo, which is the first time we've done this. So we'll see how that goes. I'm excited about it. And then the other thing I would like to tell everybody about, that in November, we are doing a dementia intensive again with James L. West. We did this last November, and it's a 6 hours training. It's designed for caregivers and family, quite honestly. So it is a 1 day, 6 hours of dementia training. Goes over a whole host of topics. It'll be in November. We'll have everything out on that soon. And so please, if you're interested in that, check back on the TALA website or James L. West to get more information on that. And with that, ladies, thank you so much for sharing your day with us.
Thank
and
you.
Kathe, thank you for being with us and for writing this beautiful book. And I want to thank everybody that tuned in with us today. And I hope everybody has a very good day for the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Good job.
Thank
See
you.
you later. Bye. Okay.